Alright, this is part 5 of A Country Defeated in Victory by James Montgomery. We continue with the damning words of Congressman Louis McFadden condemning, rightfully, the Federal Reserve agents, the money lords, and their presidential puppet FDR. Let's continue this. McFadden goes on here. This is the fatal experiment Franklin D. Roosevelt has undertaken. This is a part of his policy of bold experimentation. Not long ago, he told the people at Savannah that George Washington, like himself, was an experimenter. Mr. Chairman, there are no points of resemblance between George Washington and Franklin D. Roosevelt, experimental or otherwise. George Washington did not take orders from money changers. I'm not so sure about that, Congressman McFadden. If you had read the rest of James Montgomery's work, if you were around today, I think you would change your mind on that. But hey, that's just me talking. Back to McFadden's words. He did not rob the people of their gold. George Washington abhorred dishonor in all its forms. He would have died before he would have violated his oath of office or tampered with the Constitution of the United States. I don't think he's right there. He tampered with it right away, and Montgomery proved that in his next book. James Montgomery did. When George Washington initiated the district states, he divided the geographic states into district states, fictitious entities, right away, right when he got to be president. And that's how he stamped out the Whiskey Rebellion when he already had access to the militia. He could have done that constitutionally. George Washington decided to rip apart the Constitution right away in 1791. That's a fact that very little people know, but again, James Montgomery proved in his subsequent book, America is Still a British Colony. Let's continue. In the manner of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, Mr. Chairman, let us hear the true purpose of the $2 billion fund which this bill proposes to set up. I quote from the prophecies of Henry Morgenthau, Mr. Baruch's Secretary of the United States Treasury, as shown by the following article, which appeared in the Washington Times of January 16th, 1934. Quote, when you play poker, you want just as many blue chips as the other fellow. That, in a man's language, was the gist of Secretary Morgenthau's summing up of the Roosevelt proposal for a $2 billion stabilization fund to protect the currency of the United States. I don't know where the unquote's going to be here, folks. Oh, I see it. I take it back. So this is still the quote. This is still a quote that is being offered up by McFadden. In other words, the American government is engaged in probably the greatest gamble of all time. The stake is the credit of the United States to equal British. When asked why a figure of 2,000 millions for the stabilization fund had been asked, Morgenthau said, we figured we might need an amount substantially equal to the British Stabilization Fund. If we are going to play, we must have as many chips as the other fellow. We want every piece of machinery the other countries have. We want to be in a position to buy gold and to sell gold. The 2,000 million stabilization fund will be derived from the government's profit on the debasing of the value of the dollar to from 50 to 60% of the normal valuation. Fund from profits. If the debasement is 50%, the profit to the government will be $4 billion in round numbers. A 60-cent dollar will mean about 2,666 millions in profits. Out of these profits will come the stabilization fund to be administered by the Secretary of the Treasury, the remainder being available for any government expenditure. Morgenthau said, "It is possible that the mere existence of the fund will be sufficient to carry out the law which requires that the Secretary of the Treasury maintain all lawful money of the government on parity with gold. The Secretary of the Treasury is charged with the responsibility of administration of the fund to carry out that purpose. If any particular type of currency issued, United States notes, for instance, should become depreciated in value, the Treasury would go into the market and buy a sufficient quantity of that currency to maintain its parity. Operations in the foreign markets to protect possible depreciation of the dollar would be similar." Unquote. Back to the words of McFadden himself. Let this quotation from Morgenthau go down into history. Long from now, some curious investigator of the present age of witchcraft and magic in the White House may unearth it and reconstruct the financial history of the New Deal from it, as science from a single part reconstructs the entire animal. Mr. Chairman, it is not the gambler's voice in Mr. Morgenthau's confession which most deserves political attention. We are becoming accustomed here to gambling terms, as they are employed by the executive branch of the government, and we can well understand that the executive and his favorites must of necessity speak the lingo of their kind. This is a gambler's administration, and all the big-shot gamblers are here to revel in it. Mr. Roosevelt does not deny his gambling propensities. He is a New Dealer. He is on his way, and he doesn't know where he is going. Those are all quotes of his. He is for a policy of bold experimentation, he says, just as Samuel Insull was for a policy of bold experimentation. He has not been Ben Smith's patron all these years for nothing. But, Mr. Chairman, there is something apart from the vice of gambling to be observed in Mr. Morgenthau's utterance, and that is its entire untruthfulness. He would have us believe that the United States is on one side of the fence and Great Britain on the other. That, of course, is not the case. The United States has been placed in a position of financial servitude to Great Britain. There it is, folks. There it is. And Mr. Morgenthau's loud-sounding propaganda is designed to conceal that fact from the people. Great pains have been taken to conceal it. It would be very damaging to this administration if certain people in the United States should find out about the great sums of United States money which have been sent to England during the past summer. Those funds were appropriated by the Congress for the people of the United States. Mr. Chairman, why should tax money paid by American citizens be sent to London? There it is, folks. There it is. The Federal Reserve doesn't stop there. The Federal Reserve is beholden to the Bank of London. Always was. It was especially so after 1933, as Congressman McFadden is pointing out here. Continuing. Oh, and you can follow that pyramid of power up beyond the Bank of London to the Bank of England to the Bank of the Vatican, of course. Continuing. When England makes her periodical gesture of insult toward the United States by paying a small installment on the war debt she owes us, she pays us in debased coins, in token coins to be exact. But when Mr. Roosevelt sends American money to England, he sends it in gold, or its equivalent. when Mr. Morgenthau obtains his kitty, for this, I have been told, is what he called the proposed stabilization fund at the White House a week ago, last Sunday evening, American funds will be fed to Europe more expeditiously and with less secretly than such operations now require. If Congress puts the people's property into a kitty, someone, if he cannot by the night of the bedchamber, can at least pose before royalty as the knight of the kitty. Mr. Chairman, understanding that Henry Morgenthau is related by marriage to Herbert Lehman, Jewish governor of the state of New York, and is related by marriage or otherwise to the Seligmans of the international Jewish firm of J&W Seligman, who were publicly shown before a Senate committee of investigation to have offered a bribe to a foreign government, and to the Lewisons, a firm of Jewish international bankers, and to the Warburgs, whose operations through Kuhn, Loeb and Company, the International Acceptance Bank, and the Bank of Manhattan Company, and other foreign and domestic institutions under their control, have drained billions of dollars out of the United States Treasury and the bank deposits belonging to the United States citizens, and to the Strausses, proprietors of R.H. Macy and Company of New York, which is an outlet for foreign goods dumped upon this country at the expense of the United States government. Sounds like Macy's used to be the Walmart of its time. Which is compelled to issue paper money on the said foreign goods of the Strausses. And that Mr. Morgenthau is likewise related or otherwise connected with various other members of the Jewish banking community of New York and London, Amsterdam, and other foreign financial centers, and that he has as his assistant, presiding over public funds, Earl Bailey, a member of the firm of J&W Seligman, bribe givers as aforesaid. It seems to me that Henry Morgenthau's presence in the United States Treasury and the request that Congress now give him a $2 billion kitty of the people's money for gambling purposes is a striking confirmation of the statement made by me on the floor of the House on May 29, 1933, which statement was as follows. Now, Mr. Chairman, we have come to the place where we must decide whether we shall serve God or Mammon. Shall we nullify the Constitution at the behest of the money changers, who have unlawfully taken all our gold and lawful money into their own possession? Or shall we take a stand here in defense of the faith of our fathers? Mr. Chairman, my mind is made up. I will stand by the Constitution. If I should fail to do so, I should expect to be met at the train when I go home to my district by a delegation of honest Pennsylvania citizens with 50 or 100 feet of rope. I should expect to be escorted to the nearest tree, to be taught what it means to vote for a nullification of the Constitution in the House of Representatives. Mr. Chairman, the provisions of this repudiation bill were foretold by a writer in the Dearborn Independent some years ago. There is, therefore, nothing novel or original about them. The writer of the article in the Dearborn Independent made the following quotation prophesying some of the measures which have been introduced here by the President of the United States. 2. Confiscation of money in order to regulate its circulation. 3. We must introduce a unit of exchange based on the value of labor units. regardless of whether paper or wood is used as the medium. We will issue money to meet the normal demands of every subject, adding a total sum for every birth and decreasing the total amount for every death. 4. Commercial paper will be bought by the government, which will grant loans on a business basis. A measure of this characteristic will prevent the stagnation of money, parasitism, and laziness, qualities which were useful to us as long as the Gentiles maintained their independence, but which are not desirable to us when our kingdom comes. 5. We will replace stock exchanges by great government credit institutions, whose functions will be to tax trade paper according to government regulations. These institutions will be in such a position that they may market or buy as many as 500 million industrial shares a day. Thus, all industrial undertakings will become dependent on us. You may well imagine what power that will give us. Remember that, when next you hear the Jewish plan that Gentiles shall do business with their own bits of paper, while Jews keep the gold reserve safely in their own hands. If the crash comes, Gentiles have the paper, and the Jews have the gold. Says Protocol 22, we hold in our hands the greatest modern power, gold. In 2 days we could free it from our treasuries in any desired quantities. The Jews are economists, esoteric and exoteric. They have one system to tangle up the Gentile, another which they hope to install when Gentile stupidity has bankrupted the world. The Jews are economists. Note the number of them who teach economics in the state universities. Says Protocol 8, we will surround our government with a whole world of economists. It is for this reason that the science of economics is the chief subject of instruction taught by the Jews. Mr. Chairman, have not most of these predictions come to pass? Is it not true that in the United States today the Gentiles have the slips of paper, while the Jews have the gold and lawful money? And is not this repudiation bill a bill specifically designed and written by the Jewish international money changers themselves in order to perpetuate their power? Sounds like, Congressman McFadden is definitely on the right track here. Unfortunately, he doesn't know who these Jewish international financiers work for, as in the Rothschilds themselves. One of their official titles is the purse holders of the Vatican's billions, right? Trillions now. Even the Rothschilds themselves are but employees of the Vatican. But McFadden's on the right track here, at least, when no one else in Congress was. Certainly no one today. All right, continuing. What else do you make of it, Mr. Chairman? Does it not cancel the war debts? Does it not defraud the veterans of the World War and take the value out of their adjusted compensation certificates? Mr. Chairman, do you not see in this kitty bill the identical features outlined in the Protocols of Zion? Do you not see the Protocols of Zion manifested in the appointment of Henry Morgenthau as Secretary of the Treasury? It is not by accident, is it, that a representative and a relative of the money Jews of Wall Street and foreign parts has been so elevated? Why, Mr. Chairman, this kitty bill takes the hitherto obscure young Henry Morgenthau and makes of him a central bank of the United States. It makes of him a central bank. an institution which Jefferson declared is one of deadly hostility to the free institutions of the United States. Why didn't they listen to this guy? Well, we know why. It exalts him above all other men. Under the powers to be granted him, his conduct is not subject to review or control by any other officer of the United States government, not even the President. What this Kitty Bill really does is to slide into the hands of Henry Morgenthau the emergency powers which Congress granted to the President. Those powers which Congress granted to the President. Those powers will not lapse. Instead, they are being slyly and dishonestly transferred to the bankers, and after the bankers, in the person of Henry Morgenthau, have exercised them long enough to get the gold of the United States into their exclusive possession and to transfer it to their den of thieves, the Bank for International Settlements. Congress may then take back its constitutional power over the monetary gold of the people of the United States, will, like the sons of the people, be buried in a foreign field. Mr. Chairman, if you, as one of the party in power, are thinking of remaking the world so that the old America we knew and loved is to be no more, if you are one of those who is countenancing the placing of this country under the British Crown and the pooling of all American resources with those of England and Soviet Russia, if you are one of those to whom a title of nobility appears to be more desirable than plain citizenship in the republic founded by George Washington, I trust that you will some day descend from the Speaker's chair and let us know the reasons for your preference. If, on the other hand, you are not what these words depict, I trust that you will come down to the floor and tell us how constitutional government is to be maintained in this country if the plutocratic managers of the Democratic Party continue their efforts to destroy it. You, if anyone, should be able to give the people of the United States an answer to this question. Under this administration, the result of the American Revolution has been reversed. The United States has become an economic vassal of Great Britain. There it is. There it is. The once proud Republic of the United States, with its great charter of human freedom, the Declaration of Independence, and its written Constitution, which had kept it free and independent for over 140 years, and its flag first made by the hands of Betsy Ross in Philadelphia, and its national anthem born within earshot of the British guns that shelled Fort McHenry, all these, like the American dollar, were brought down from their high estate. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Mr. Chairman, you know very well that you cannot see that flag there as it used to be. Others started very cautiously to pull it down, but it was Franklin D. Roosevelt, in his unlawful and unconstitutional assumption of dictatorial powers, who finally lowered it and tore it from its standard. Now that the gold bill is explained, and the reader knows why he turned in his gold and what became of it, what about that soldier's bonus we used to hear so much about? Have our congressmen forgotten the boys that made the world safe for democracy? Or was it merely safe for the money changers? We, as a nation, are pledged by law to pay them their bonus or compensation certificates in 1945, and they surely need it now if they ever will. Will the reader please remember how President Lincoln issued $60 million in full legal tender greenbacks and paid his soldiers? Would the reader like some real authority on this subject? Then listen to Robert H. Hemphill, financial authority and editorial writer on financial matters in the Hearst papers, and a really profound student on such matters. Writing in the Hearst papers of March 17, 1934, Mr. Hemphill has the following to say about sound money. Quote, during the month of February 1934, we imported $371,347,100 in gold. We paid for it with fiat money, Treasury notes of the United States, printing press money, paper money, greenbacks, irredeemable in gold, silver, or any specific metal, lawful money of the United States, fiat money in every sense of the word. We have now no other kind of currency. It is the best money in the world. Despite the unlimited quantity offered in exchange for gold, and the threat inherent in our huge secret stabilization fund, it has been so far almost impossible to prevent our fiat money from commanding a constant premium over its theoretical par in exchange for the most prized possession of European nations, their gold. It is very important to remember this. We are rapidly approaching a situation where the government must issue additional currency. It will very soon be the only move remaining. It should have been the first step in the recovery program. Immediately upon a revival of the demand that the government increase the supply of currency, we shall again be subjected to a barrage of skillfully designed and cunningly circulated propaganda, by means of which a small group of international bankers have been able, for 2 centuries, to frighten the peoples of the civilized world against issuing their own good money in sufficient quantities to carry on their necessary commerce. By this simple but amazingly successful device, these money changers, parasites in a busy world intent on creating and exchanging wealth, have been able to preserve for their private and exclusive right the monopoly of manufacturing an inferior substitute for money, which they have hypnotized civilized nations into using, because of their pressing need to exchange goods and services. We shall never recover on credit. Even if it were obtainable, it is uncertain, unreliable, does not expand in accordance with demand, and contracts unexpectedly and for causes unrelated to the needs of commerce and industry. Demand deposits cannot be loaned to commerce and industry. Many bankers have known this for a long time. It required this depression and the complete freezing of the whole banking system to teach the rest, but with a very few exceptions, they have all learned. I am convinced that the NRA experiment is running into a jam. It has developed into a wholly different doctrine than the original conception. Having failed to stimulate recovery, the present idea is to distribute non-existent profits from one group to another. Under any system of reasoning, the purchasing power, however, will remain the same. Instead of providing for expansion, which means the creation and exchange of more wealth, its underlying philosophy is the creation and exchange of less wealth. It is difficult to believe adult human beings at any stages in the development of civilization could be led into serious consideration of a system founded on such an absurd doctrine. We need in circulation $250 per capita in permanent, uncontractable currency, deposited in depositaries and payable on demand, to sustain the standard of living to which we had arrived in 1927 to 1929, to pay the then prevailing prices, wages, and costs, to produce incomes and restore the property values of that period. It makes no difference how this currency is put into circulation. We are all producers, and we are all likewise consumers. Each one of us buys from all the others. If 1,000 million of new currency is thrown into circulation anywhere in the system, it becomes almost immediately distributed throughout the nation. It increases the transactions of the nation, an average of 36,000 millions per year. And because we all buy the same things, in the same order of preference, our business increases in the normal manner. First, the necessities of life, next, the necessary luxuries, and lastly, capital goods. We are all so anxious to produce and trade our products, our goods and our services with our neighbors, that we will accept almost any kind of money which we have a fair chance of passing on for the things we want. In our present situation, the issue of additional currency is the only way out. Is there any good reason that Congress cannot or should not do this now? Or pass a bill to remonetize silver? Is there any reason why that should not be done either? Yes, dear reader, there is, and that reason is the control of our whole country by the foreign money changers through the Federal Reserve System of banks that have the power to issue unlimited amounts of their own greenbacks, redeemable by our government, and to withhold loans and call loans and inflate and deflate the currency and the country at their own pleasure and for their own profit. How long, O God, will the American people stand for such a condition, when all they need is a safe, sane, reasonable plan of economic security and quote-unquote united action to put into operation? After this country was forced into bankruptcy, i.e. financial slavery, war was declared on the American people. This country has been destroyed from within, first by taking over its finances, and then the taking over and possession of the United States government. The presidency was taken over when President Franklin Roosevelt was elected. Looks like we've shifted into the words of James Montgomery, I'm guessing here. There's no quotes indicating it, but this has the ring of Montgomery himself here. Let's see if I'm wrong. The presidency was taken over when President Franklin Roosevelt was elected. Through him, the banks were able to declare war on the American people and enslave them through the social programs that were enacted by Congress. Congress went along to get along. The majority of these men were lawyers, and they sold out the American people. Because voting is a privilege and not a right, and proves your membership in the metaphorical term in, you guessed it, the United States Corporation, Congress had the legal right, but not the moral right, to enact legislation that made every American that voted for that Congress an alien enemy, which is a legal term, which simply means that you have been declared an enemy of the United States and the bankers. There it is. There it is. Because the citizens of 1933, after all, voted in the government officials that took this action. And because of association, they were responsible. Oh, man. However, according to the law, the children of these Americans, i.e. alien enemies, have the right to remain alien enemies, or could elect to no longer be an alien enemy. To remain. This is awesome. This is the meat right here. I've been after this for 4 years since I started this, making these recordings, and this is the meat. This is it. To remain an alien enemy means to continue receiving benefits given by the government. To see what these benefits are, reread Part 1 of A Country Defeated in Victory. To discontinue being an alien enemy means to stop taking the government's benefits. Now, will this rejection of benefits stop the government from forcing you to be a slave? This is doubtful, because the men that created the conditions of your slavery still wish you to be a slave. Their purpose is to establish a one-world government. These men and those that replace them are still in power and control every aspect of your life. They will not give up a slave just because the slave no longer wishes to be a slave. So what is the purpose of resisting your enslavement? Should we do as Congress did and just go along to get along? Let me ask you this. Did our anti-federalist forefathers give in for financial comfort? No. Well, maybe not the anti-federalist ones, but all the others sure did. And James Montgomery, I've read James Montgomery's book that he wrote after this, and that was his conclusion later on. Continuing. If you believe in God Almighty, and have received the redemptive blood of Jesus Christ, His Son, and you also believe that the Bible is the living Word of God Almighty, you also must know that it is not possible to serve two masters. Either you serve God Almighty or man. Jesus said in Revelation 20, verse 4, "Those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received the mark upon their forehead and upon their hand, and they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years." The reward for rejecting Babylon and the mark of the beast is to reign with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years. So, if you choose to be an alien enemy, be aware that there are consequences to your actions. The term alien enemies is defined in the following pages. The following is a quote from Congressman James Beck. "I think of all the damnable heresies that have ever been suggested in connection with the Constitution, the doctrine of emergency is the worst. It means that when Congress declares an emergency, there is no Constitution. This means it's death. But the Constitution of the United States has a restraining influence in keeping the federal government within the carefully prescribed channels of power, is moribund, if not dead. We are witnessing its death agonies. For when this bill becomes law, if unhappily it becomes law, there is no longer any workable Constitution to keep the Congress within the limits of its constitutional powers." That was a quote from the Congressional Record, 1933, from Congressman James Beck. The following are excerpts from the Senate Report, 93rd Congress, November 19th, 1973, Special Committee on the Termination of the National Emergency, United States Senate. Since March 9th, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. There it is, folks. There it is. And here, we're, our puppet leaders, they're chiding the puppet over in Egypt is it Egypt or Libya? Maybe both, I don't know. But they're chiding those governments, or that government, to end the state of declared national emergency, equivalent pretty much to martial law, that has been going on in that country for 30 years. What hypocrites, what bald-faced hypocrites are our puppet leaders when we have been in a state of national emergency for 70 years, since 1933, March 9th. There it is. So, continuing. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and, in a plethora of particular ways, control the lives of all American citizens. A majority of the people of the United States have lived all of their lives under emergency rule. For 40 years, and this was written in 1973, remember, for 40 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws brought into force by states of national emergency. From at least the Civil War, in important ways, shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. Remember, I'm reading from the Congressional Record here, folks. It's in black and white. You can't deny this. I know, somebody brainwashed by the mainstream media still would deny this. Okay, continuing. In Title 12, in Section 95B, you'll find the following codification of the emergency war powers. The actions, regulations, rules, licenses, orders, and proclamations heretofore or hereafter taken, promulgated, made, or issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury since March 4th, 1933, pursuant to the authority conferred by subsection B of Section 5 of the Act of October 6th, 1917, as amended in 12 U.S.C.S. 95A, are hereby approved and confirmed. March 9th, 1933, C.1, Title 1, 48 Stat 1. In the War Powers Act of 1917, Chapter 106, Section 2C, it says that these declared war powers did not affect citizens of the United States. Such other individuals or body or class of individuals as may be natives, citizens, or subjects of any nation with which the United States is at war, other than citizens of the United States, wherever resident or wherever doing business, as the President, if he shall find the safety of the United States, of the successful prosecution of the war, shall so require, may, by proclamation, include the term enemy. the declared national emergency of March 9, 1933, amended the War Powers Act to include the American people as enemies. In Title I, Section 1, it says, "The actions, regulations, rules, licenses, orders, and proclamations heretofore or hereafter taken, promulgated, made, or issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury since March 4, 1933, pursuant to the authority conferred by Subdivision B of Section 5 of the Act of October 6, 1917, as amended, are hereby approved and confirmed." Section 2, Subdivision B of Section 5 of the Act of October 6, 1917, 40 Stat L 411, as amended, is hereby amended to read as follows. Emergency declared by the President may, through any agency that he may designate, or otherwise, investigate, regulate, or prohibit under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe. Folks, what they're describing here is what Bill and Hillary Clinton would do routinely during their presidency. And yes, I will say their presidency. Whenever they had somebody nipping at their heels, pointing out that, the dead body count that they left in their wake in Arkansas, the Clinton body count, and the drugs that were brought in under Clinton's governorship and Daddy Bush's presidency into Mena, Arkansas, and the financial scandals with Whitewater. Anytime anybody brought that up, and of course the sexual scandals, all of that, it was routine for Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, the co-president, to sick the IRS on them. They never, of course, did so in the overtly. It was always happenstance, a coincidence, just a coincidence that anybody who went after the Clintons got, suddenly they had an audit. Gee, I wonder why that was. But it's legal, just like Adolf Hitler. Everything he did was made to be legal. The guy never broke the law. Presidents aren't breaking the Constitution now. They're not violating anything. It's right here in the law. See, these bad guys, they like to, believe it or not, these satanic bad guys, they like to stick to the rules. They really do. Probably because it's a greater insult to those that they are violating. Because they're not doing anything illegal. Why should we complain? Well, while we're being fleeced and worse. Continuing, the President may, through any agency, designate or otherwise, investigate, regulate, or prohibit, under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe, by means of licenses or otherwise, any transactions in foreign exchange, transfers of credit between, or payments by banking institutions, as defined by the President, and export, hoarding, melting, or earmarking of gold, or silver coin, or bullion, or currency, by any person within the United States, or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Again, there goes George Gordon's argument out of Missouri. Smart man, one of the wisest men I've ever heard speak. However, they're not going to let you out of a totalitarian system. They're just not. You may think you're out. It's just because you're small enough to where they haven't come after you yet. It says, by any person. You may have rescinded your Social Security number successfully back when you could still do it. You may be dealing only in property in gold and silver, not using Federal Reserve notes. You don't have an income. All of that, you're off the system, off the grid. And yet you're still within the United States. It's any person. Any person. Continuing. Any person, yeah. Person's a corporation, too. It's a fictition. Well, then again, still, they're still going to get you. Even though you're not using a driver's license and you don't have the all-caps name for yourself, that's a legal fiction. They're still going to come after you as an alien living within their system, their corporation, whenever they want to. Continuing, the phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is defined. In Ballantyne's Law Dictionary, it says, a phrase made familiar by inclusion in the 14th Amendment. As these words are used in the first section of the 14th Amendment of the Federal Constitution, providing for the citizenship of all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, the purpose would appear to have been to exclude, by the fewest words, parenthesis, besides children of members of the Indian tribes, standing in a peculiar relation to the national government, unknown to the common law, end parenthesis, the two classes of cases, children born of alien enemies in hostile occupation, and children of diplomatic representatives of a foreign state, both of which, by the law of England and by our own law, from the time of the first settlement of the English colonies in America, had been recognized exceptions to the fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the country. See United States v. Wong Kim Ark, 169 U.S. 649 682 42 LED 890 902 18 SCT 456. Boy, never say James Montgomery doesn't give you the specifics. Continuing. The specific citations this guy does. This is irrefutable stuff, folks. Look it up. I just read the numbers for you of the court case. The phrase alien enemy is defined in Bouvier's Law Dictionary as one who owes allegiance to the adverse belligerent. 1 Kent 7:3. He who owes a temporary but not a permanent allegiance is an alien enemy in respect to acts done during such temporary allegiance only, and when his allegiance terminates, his hostile character terminates also. 1 B and P 163. Alien enemies are said to have no rights, no privileges, unless by the king's special favor during time of war. 1 BLA COM 372. Binkershock 195, 8 term 166. Parenthesis. Remember, we have been under a declared state of war since October 6th, 1917, and amended March 9th, 1933, to include every United States citizen. End parenthesis. The phrase alien enemy is defined in Words and Phrases as residence of person in territory of nation at war with United States was sufficient to characterize him as alien enemy within Trading with the Enemy Act, even if he had acquired and retained American citizenship. See Monterey's v. Monterey's 59A 2D 262 265 142 NJ, New Jersey, EQ 226. Residence or doing business in a hostile territory is the test of an alien enemy, within meaning of the Trading with the Enemy Act and executive orders thereunder. Executive Order March 11th, 1942, number 9095, as amended, 50 USCA, Appendix 6 Trading with the Enemy Act 5B in Oneida National Bank and Trust Company of Utica, 53, New York State, 2D 416-420-421-183, miscellaneous 374. By the modern phrase, a man who resides under the allegiance and protection of a hostile state for commercial purposes is to be considered to all civil purposes as much an alien enemy as if he were born there. That quote from the case Hutchinson versus Brock, 1-1, Massachusetts, 119122. Montgomery now writes, "The author of the following is not known. I add it because it is appropriate to end this paper. Secret knowledge as the key to power." By embracing deception wholeheartedly at every level, finance capitalism, or rule through money, has fashioned the ultimate system yet devised for the secure exercise of power. The hidden masters of finance capitalism control those who head governments and those who head manufacturing. Dominance in all aspects of society is surreptitiously accomplished, while the great majority of the ruled, and even most of the visible leaders, believe themselves to be fairly autonomous. Throughout history, secure ruling elites arise through secret knowledge which they carefully guard and withhold from outsiders. The power of such elites or cults diminishes as their hidden knowledge is undermined by truths gained by independent scientific investigation, and vanishes as soon as it becomes common sense. Before analyzing the secrets of the finance capitalist money cult, let's look for historical perspective in occult astronomy, the oldest source of stable rule known to man, of which astrology is the remnant. As soon as men abandoned the life of wandering hunters to till the soil, they needed to predict the seasons. Man, wherever this thing's going, it sounds fairly like The Babylonian Woe by David Astle, which I've read into audio. I'm not saying this is it, but man, it just has the ring of it, the tenor of that book. Okay, which is on my Ministry of Truth archives, by the way. Okay, continuing. Such knowledge was required in order to know when to plant, when to expect floods in fertile valleys, when to expect rainy seasons, and so forth. Months of back-breaking plowing and planning could be wasted by farming the land at the wrong times. There were no calendars. The men who first studied and grasped the regularities of sun, moon, and stars that presage the seasons had a valuable commodity to sell, and they milked it to the fullest at the expense of their credulous fellow men. The occult priesthoods of early astronomers and mathematicians convinced their subjects that they alone had contact with the gods, and thus they alone could assure the return of planting seasons and weather favorable to bountiful harvest. The predicting of solar and lunar eclipses was particularly effective when staged to awe the community. The general success resulting from following the priests' timetables for planting ensured the priesthood's power. Today's Christmas holiday season continues the tradition set by ancient priesthoods who conducted rituals on the winter solstice to reverse the retreat of the sun from the sky. their invariable success was followed by wild celebrations. Popular knowledge of seasonal regularities was discouraged by every manner of mysticism and outlandish ritual imaginable. Failures in prediction were blamed on sins of the people and used to justify intensified oppression. For centuries, people who had literally no idea of the number of days between seasons and couldn't count anyway, cheerfully gave up a portion of their harvests as well as their most beautiful daughters to their quote-unquote faithful servants in the priesthoods. The power of our finance capitalist money system rests on a similar secret knowledge, primarily in the field of economics. Our power is weakened by real advance in economic science. Fortunately for us, the public at large, government leaders, and most revolutionaries remain totally ignorant of economy. However, we who are the established money lords have been able to... This is writing in first person now. Now it's not sounding like David Astle. It sounds like it's being written by the donkey caravaneers that David Astle writes about in The Babylonian Woe. It's sounding a bit like the protocols now. All right, continuing. However, we, who are the established money lords, have been able to prolong our control by systematically corrupting economic science with fallacious and spurious doctrines. Through our power in the universities and over the mass media, we have been able to reward the sincere professorial cranks whose spurious doctrines happen to rationalize, in terms of quote-unquote common good, the government-supported institutions, laws, and economic measures upon which our money powers depend. Keynesianism is the highest form of phony economics yet developed to our benefit. I'm glad somebody finally called it what it is. The highly centralized, mixed economy resulting from the policies advocated by Lord Keynes for, quote-unquote, promoting prosperity, has all the characteristics required to make our rule invulnerable to our twin nemesises: real private competition in the economic arena and real democratic process in the political arena. Laissez-faire, or free market, classical economics was our original attempt to corrupt economic science. Its beautiful internal consistency blinded economists for many years to the fact that it had virtually nothing to do with current reality. However, we are so powerful today that it is no longer possible to conceal our imposing institutions with the appearances of free competition. Keynesianism rationalizes the omnipotent state, which we require, while retaining the privileges of private property on which our power ultimately rests. Although the interim reforms advocated by Marx in his Communist Manifesto, such as central banking, income tax, and other centralizing measures, can be corrupted to coincide exactly with our requirements, we no longer allow Marxist movements major power in developed countries. Our coercive institutions are already in place. Any real steps toward communism would mean our downfall. Of course, phony Marxism is an excellent ideological veil by which to cloak our puppet dictators in underdeveloped areas of the world. Secondarily, the power of the money lord rests on secret knowledge in the areas of politics and history. We have quite successfully corrupted these sciences, although many people are familiar with our secrets through such books as 1984 by the disillusioned George Orwell. Few take them seriously and usually dismiss such ideas as paranoia. Since real politics is motivated by individual self-interest, history is viewed most accurately as a struggle for power and wealth. We do our best to obscure this self-evident truth by popularizing the theory that history is made by the impersonal struggles between ideas, political systems, ideologies, races, and classes. And that's how they corrupt the government school systems and their history books. Through systematic infiltration of all major intellectual, political, and ideological organizations, using the lure of financial support and instant publicity, we have been able to set the limits of public debate within the ideological requirements of our money power. The so-called left-right political spectrum is our creation. In fact, it accurately reflects our careful, artificial polarization of the population on phony issues that prevents the issue of our power from arising in their minds. The left supports civil liberties and opposes economic or entrepreneurial liberty. The right supports economic liberty and opposes civil liberty. Of course, neither can exist fully without the other. Our goal is to control the left-right conflict such that both forms of liberty are suppressed to the degree that we require. Our own liberty rests not on legal or moral rights, but on our control of the government bureaucracy and courts, which apply the complex, subjective regulations we dupe the public into supporting for our own benefit. Innumerable meaningless conflicts to divert the attention of the public from our operations find fertile ground in the bitter hatreds of the left-right imbroglio. Right and left are irreconcilable on racial policy, treatment of criminals, law enforcement, pornography, foreign policy, women's lib, and censorship, to name just a few issues. We generally do not take sides in these issues. Instead, we attempt to prolong the conflicts by supporting both sides as required. War, of course, is the ultimate diversionary conflict and serves to enlarge our power and wealth. War provides the perfect cover of emergency and crisis, behind which we consolidate our power. Since nuclear war presents dangers even to us, more and more we have resorted to economic crisis, energy shortages, ecological hysteria, and managed political drama to fill the gap. Meaningless brushfire wars, though, remain useful and profitable. We promote phony free enterprise on the right and phony democratic socialism on the left in all the nations we control. Thus we obtain a quote-unquote free enterprise whose quote-unquote competition is carefully regulated by the bureaucracy we control, and whose nationalized enterprises are controlled through the governments we direct. In this way, we maintain a society in which the basis of our power, legal titles to property and money, remain secure, while the peril of free, unregulated competition is avoided, and popular sovereignty is nullified. The democratic process is a sitting duck for our money power. Invariably, we determine the candidates of the major parties and then proceed to pick the winners. Any attempts at campaign reforms simply put the rules of the game more firmly under our government's control. Totalitarianism of the fascist or communist varieties is no danger to us, as long as bastions of private property remain to serve as our bases of operation. Totalitarian governments of both right and left, because of the vulnerability of their highly visible leaders to party rivals, can be manipulated easily from abroad. Primarily, totalitarian dictatorships efficiently prevent new money lords who could challenge our power from arising in whole continents, in civilizations and races. All right, folks, this is getting long again. All right, so this has been part 5, and it looks like we're going to have a part 6. Part 6 will be the end, so it's longer than I thought. This has been, folks, part 5 of A Country Defeated in Victory by James Montgomery. Responsibility of administration of the fund to carry out that purpose. If any particular type of currency issued, United States notes, for instance, should become depreciated in value, the Treasury would go into the market and buy a sufficient quantity of that currency to maintain its parity. Operations in the foreign markets to protect possible depreciation of the dollar would be similar. Unquote. Back to the words of McFadden himself. Let this quotation from Morgenthau go down into history. Long from now, some curious investigator of the present age of witchcraft and magic in the White House may unearth it and reconstruct the financial history of the New Deal from it, as science from a single part reconstructs the entire animal. Mr. Chairman, it is not the gambler's voice in Mr. Morgenthau's confession which most deserves political attention. We are becoming accustomed here to gambling terms, as they are employed by the executive branch of the government, and we can well understand that the executive and his favorites must of necessity speak the lingo of their kind. This is a gambler's administration, and all the big-shot gamblers are here to revel in it. Mr. Roosevelt does not deny his gambling propensities. He is a New Dealer. He is on his way, and he doesn't know where he is going. Those are all quotes of his. He is for a policy of bold experiment. All right, this is part 5 of A Country Defeated in Victory by James Montgomery. We continue with the damning words of Congressman Louis McFadden condemning, rightfully, the Federal Reserve agents, the money lords, and their presidential puppet FDR. Let's continue this. McFadden goes on here. This is the fatal experiment Franklin D. Roosevelt has undertaken. This is a part of his policy of bold experimentation. Not long ago he told the people at Savannah that George Washington, like himself, was an experimenter. Mr. Chairman, there are no points of resemblance between George Washington and Franklin D. Roosevelt, experimental or otherwise. George Washington did not take orders from money changers. I'm not so sure about that, Congressman McFadden. If you had read the rest of James Montgomery's work, if you were around today, I think you would change your mind on that. But hey, that's just me talking. Back to McFadden's words. He did not rob the people of their gold. George Washington abhorred dishonor in all its forms. He would have died before he would have violated his oath of office or tampered with the Constitution of the United States. I don't think he's right there. In other words, the American government is engaged in probably the greatest gamble of all time. The stake is the credit of the United States to equal British. When asked why a figure of 2,000 millions for the stabilization fund had been asked, Morgenthau said, "We figured we might need an amount substantially equal to the British stabilization fund. If we are going to play, we must have as many chips as the other fellow. We want every piece of machinery the other countries have. We want to be in a position to buy gold and to sell gold. The 2,000 million stabilization fund will be derived from the government's profit on the debasing of the value of the dollar to from 50 to 60% of the normal valuation. Fund from profits. If the debasement is 50%, the profit to the government will be $4 billion in round numbers. A 60-cent dollar will mean about 2,666 millions in profits. Out of these profits will come the stabilization fund to be administered by the Secretary of the Treasury, the remainder being available for any government expenditure. Morgenthau said, "It is possible that the mere existence of the fund will be sufficient to carry out the law which requires that the Secretary of the Treasury maintain all lawful money of the government on parity with gold. The Secretary of the Treasury is charged with the responsibility," he says, just as Samuel Insull was for a policy of bold experimentation. He has not been Ben Smith's patron all these years for nothing. But, Mr. Chairman, there is something apart from the vice of gambling to be observed in Mr. Morgenthau's utterance, and that is its entire untruthfulness. He would have us believe that the United States is on one side of the fence and Great Britain on the other. That, of course, is not the case. The United States has been placed in a position of financial servitude to Great Britain. There it is, folks. There it is. And Mr. Morgenthau's loud-sounding propaganda is designed to conceal that fact from the people. Great pains have been taken to conceal it. It would be very damaging to this administration if certain people in the United States should find out about the great sums of United States money which have been sent to England during the past summer. Those funds were appropriated by the Congress for the people of the United States. Mr. Chairman, why should tax money paid by American citizens be sent to London? There it is, folks. There it is. The Federal Reserve doesn't stop there. The Federal Reserve is beholden to the Bank of London. Always was. He tampered with it right away, and Montgomery proved that in his next book. James Montgomery did. When George Washington initiated the district states, he divided the geographic states into district states, fictitious entities, right away, right when he got to be president. And that's how he stamped out the Whiskey Rebellion when he already had access to the militia. He could have done that constitutionally. George Washington decided to rip apart the Constitution right away in 1791. That's a fact that very little people know, but again, James Montgomery proved in his subsequent book, America is Still a British Colony. Let's continue. In the manner of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, Mr. Chairman, let us hear the true purpose of the $2 billion fund which this bill proposes to set up. I quote from the prophecies of Henry Morgenthau, Mr. Baruch's Secretary of the United States Treasury, as shown by the following article, which appeared in the Washington Times of January 16, 1934. Quote, "When you play poker, you want just as many blue chips as the other fellow." That, in a man's language, was the gist of Secretary Morgenthau's summing up of the Roosevelt proposal for a $2 billion stabilization fund to protect the currency of the United States. I don't know where the unquote's going to be here, folks. Oh, I see it. I take it back. So this is still the quote. This is still a quote that is being offered up by McFadden.